So hello and welcome to this week's Natural Gardening Live with me, Josie Rainbow, your natural gardening coach. Today we are joined by Caroline Scott from Abundant Edible Gardening. She helps people to create a garden that works in harmony with nature, to grow more food for less with more fun. So hello Caroline and welcome to the live stream. Hello Caroline, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you today.
It looks lovely and sunny where you are. I hope it's nice.
It kind of is. It might rain, but yeah, it's that mixed spring weather where
yeah, you're organised, prepared for it. It's fine. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into specialising in food foresting? Tell us about the concept.
So I guess that I really specialise in edible gardens, and I guess a food forest is just one way of describing. It's one part of what I do basically. So I have been growing food for about 20 years, and I really love. I started off growing food because I love food. I like eating food, and that got me into growing. So and I had a flat without a garden, so I just got an allotment to get an outdoor space, and then I started growing. And it was a bit of a steep learning curve, as anyone who's tried to grow food probably knows. So a few years into my food growing journey, I discovered permaculture, and I did a permaculture design course and started exploring holistic growing and growing in harmony with nature. And that's when I discovered food forests and gardening in a different way, basically gardening with nature as opposed to against nature.
I love that whole side of it of working with nature and the ecosystem within the garden, and it just all supporting itself rather than us having to intervene all the time and try and control the situation. Whereas nature's got quite a natural way of looking after itself, and it doesn't really need our help a lot of the time. It can do it all on its own.
And I think there's a history, isn't there? Like in our culture, we've got a history of like separation, and like some of when I first learned about gardening, it was all about a battle. Like it was about, we're separate from nature and we have to control. That's what we're told. We have to have it a certain way, and everything, and like when you let go of that, it's so liberating and actually so much easier and better for everyone.
Exactly. I love it. So if I can ask, can you explain a couple of the benefits the whole concept can offer to domestic gardens, and how easy is it to actually incorporate into a standard sort of domestic garden? So is it easy for anybody to kind of take on? Does it take time to like develop or anything like that?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, the concept behind a food forest is that you're creating a whole ecosystem, and with many different layers. And imagine that in the UK and in a lot of temperate climates, our land wants to be a forest. It wants to be a woodland. If we abandon any plot of land, any building, anything like that, it doesn't take long for a woodland to grow. So when we're talking about working in harmony with nature and like making it easy for ourselves, the closer we are to a woodland, the easier it is to maintain that system. So when you're looking at a woodland, you've got many different layers. You've got a tree layer, canopy layer, you've got shrubs and herbaceous plants, you've got ground cover plants, and you've got plants that grow under the ground, different types of roots. And so and everything in that system works together. So the idea is that when you're creating a food forest, you're creating a self-sustaining ecosystem, a bit like a woodland, that is low input. So you don't have to go to the garden centre and buy plug plants for the woodland. You don't have to go and buy compost and do anything like that. Everything is created within that system. It all goes around within. It's like contained within a closed loop system. So we are working with that idea, but we're tweaking it because not everyone wants to eat acorns. They are edible, but they're a bit hard to prepare. And so we're tweaking that so that it's more edible and more useful for us, and maybe contains more flowers and other plants that we want. So that's the kind of main concept of a food forest. Now, there's different ways that you can do this, and you can definitely incorporate it into a backyard setting really easily. you might not want to include like huge trees like you would in a woodland. You might just want to include like semi-vigorous or semi-dwarfing fruit trees, nut trees. Even like if you've got a really small space, you could have like column trees or any of those like trained trees that are like quite small. And then you've got like perennials, so like fruit bushes and herbaceous plants. With those, so there's different ways of doing it basically. If you've got a perennial border, for example, already, then you could like swap out some of the plants for ones that are edible basically and just kind of create it gradually. If you've got a lawn space or just an empty area, you could just create it all in one go. But in practice, most people kind of build this up slowly. In terms of the plants that you can grow in a food forest, the plants are generally mainly perennials. And so in terms of the food plants that we're used to, that we like know about, a lot of fruit and a lot of and nuts as well, soft fruit and a lot of different herbs and leaves. And then we've got some perennial vegetables, some of which are quite common, like rhubarb. Some people class that as a vegetable, Jerusalem artichoke, perennial kales and broccoli. And then we've also got some like super unusual plants which are edible, of which there are like thousands. And so really like you can just explore. There are so many different edible plants that you can include, but yeah, they're not like the classic vegetables that we might grow. But saying that, I do also put in a few vegetables in my forest garden. But it's just that's not the main part of it, basically.
What's your favourite plants to incorporate into a forest garden?
Okay, some of my really top picks, I love mulberries. They're really unusual fruit trees, but they're just so beautiful and really, really tasty. Also almonds. I've grown almonds even in Leeds, and the plants are stunning, and the blossom is beautiful, and you can actually grow nuts as well.
I love that.
Squirrels don't eat them for some reason, in my experience. And apples, like you can't go wrong with apples because, like, you know, they store for so long, they grow so easily. And then I guess like I'm really interested in including a lot of edible flowers in my
Oh
systems
yes.
because I love the look of them, I love eating them, I love the look of them on my plate. And another thing that I didn't mention is that there's quite a few plants that I include that are self-seeders. So they might be annual, but like they just self-seed really easily. And a lot of these are edible flowers actually. So nasturtiums are one. All parts of nasturtiums are edible, really, really tasty, useful plant. They're beautiful. Like sweet violet and calendula and borage. There's loads of these types of flowers which are edible. And loads of different herbs as well. So I think herbs are really underused in our kitchen
Absolutely.
because they're so like nutrient dense. They're really like they're superfoods. They're our homegrown superfoods, and we just need to use them because a lot of people have herbs in their garden. They might just eat a little bit, but if you can grow like big bunches to be adding, it can really add a lot of value to your diet,
Yes.
which makes a big difference. Even if it's not the main like calories in terms of nutrition, they can really pull their weight.
Yeah.
Same thing with weeds. So as you might guess, I'm quite allowing in my garden. So I try and co-create my space with nature. So that means that I'm kind of curious when things come up. I take a curious approach to weeding. So if a plant comes up, I'm like, oh, what's that? You know, do I want to keep it there? Do I not? Obviously, I don't just keep every plant, otherwise, you know, the garden would be crazy. But certain things have come up in my garden that I didn't plant and I keep them. So I eat a lot of nettles. I don't keep them everywhere. But I've got a couple of patches and I've got a couple of patches of dandelions that I eat as well. And things like hairy bittercress and chickweed and sow thistle. So all of those, like they're so nutrient dense, even more so than like homegrown greens. And they're so much easier to grow. So obviously if you're not going to eat loads of nettles and you leave a massive patch, they're going to take over. So it's about like creating a balance.
Now, see, I'm very for keeping nettles in the garden for like the butterflies, all the beneficial insects they attract in, and I use them to make food as well for the garden. So the nitrogen-rich liquid feeds that you can make with nettles, and the comfrey that grows in the garden as well. So I am all for leaving weeds in the garden because most of them will feed the garden in some way, shape, or form. and attracting all the beneficial insects we need to protect from pests and all sorts of other issues. So I'm definitely for leaving weeds growing wherever they want to grow in the garden. And obviously I do select, like, see which ones I want to keep and which ones I don't. So I'm totally for that.
When I moved in my garden, there wasn't any trees, and I really wanted some trees because I love trees. And so I had some elder trees that were just in my hedge, and they'd been cut by the previous owner, so I just let them grow, and they're so quick growing. So now I've got these quite sort of semi-large elder trees, and I use the flowers to make a tea. I use the berries to make a cordial and a syrup.
We have lots of elders around our way as well, which is amazing. So we always pick the flowers and everything. I make elderflower cordial, elderberry jams and things as well, which were amazing.
Yeah.
But I have been trying to make, I wanted to make them this year actually, some like elixirs and tinctures and things like that. So I'm collecting the elderberries for like the elixirs or something for colds. It's very high in vitamin C and can be really beneficial in that way. But it's something I've never tried before. Have you? Do you?
Yeah, what I do is I actually I make a ferment. I used to make the syrup, and that's really successful. Like with you kind of stew them down just really gently, and then strain them and mix with honey or sugar.
Yeah.
That's really good. That lasts for quite a long time. But the one I make as well, which I really love, is a ferment. And so you literally just get all of the berries and pack them in a jar. You have to take the stalks off because the stalks are toxic with elderberries, and you have to either cook them as well or ferment them in order to make them edible. And so I also add in maybe like rose hips and garlic, sometimes a little bit of garlic. And then I basically just pour on loads of honey, local, like pure honey, not honey that's been imported and irradiated, but like kind of honey that's still alive.
Yeah.
And then pour it on top, and it bubbles away and ferments like within the honey. Something else that I wanted to mention as well that I'm really interested in is that a lot of our ornamental plants that we grow are edible.
Okay.
Some of them we don't realize they're edible. So the kind of like the number one thing that you can do in creating a food forest is actually just look and see like what is in your garden right now and is it edible. So some examples of common plants that are edible, I think like fuchsias. The flowers are edible. Also, some of the fuchsias, like the fuchsia mandelica, has fruits on, which are tasty as well. There's other things like magnolia flowers are edible. Daylilies. It's worth like doing, like just checking online. And the same thing, obviously, like I mentioned with the weeds, you might have weeds that are growing that you can eat.
I do try and look at things that you can like forage and things. I try not to get too much into it. I don't want to pick something that might kill me. I do like to look into foraging and find out things that are in my garden that are edible. And we do try and grow as much companion planting, if you like, that is edible as well. So if I'm growing anything in my vegetable patch that's got a flower as a companion plant, I like to make sure that it's edible as well.
You've made a really good point there about foraging, because one of the other terms that some people use to describe a forest garden or a food forest is a forager's garden. So that's a really good point to bring up, because it's different. Like the way that you're engaging with it is more like you're foraging within the garden rather than a vegetable patch where you're doing more like planting and harvesting, and it's just a different way of engaging with it, basically.
I love the concept of many years ago we went down this road with somebody of having your whole garden incorporated. So you've got vegetables in with your flower beds. So everything, there isn't a segregation between like a vegetable patch and then you've got your flower beds. Everything's grown together.
Yeah.
And I love that, because in fairness, that's how nature works. They don't segregate themselves. It's us that does it. So having that concept of having everything grown together in one area, looking after each other, and it all acts as support for all different plants support each other. So it's really nice that it all works.
And I would say there's one thing that I'd say about that in terms of vegetables is that if someone is like a complete beginner and you've never grown any vegetables before, it might be worthwhile just kind of seeing how they grow in a little veg bed. Because sometimes when you're putting stuff together in like a polyculture, like in this kind of system, you don't like there's different kind of things can come up. Like for example, slugs can be more prevalent in a system like this if you haven't got like super healthy soil. And so that's something to watch out for. Even if you're an experienced grower, when you're putting in plants into a mixed bed with perennials in, you want to make sure that you protect from slugs when they're small. if that's an issue in your garden, because obviously there's lots of habitat around there,
Yeah.
basically. And in terms of like putting them close together, you kind of need to know about spacing. Like you need to have like a feel for how much space to give them. So
Yeah.
like with a fertile soil, you really can put them a lot closer than is sometimes recommended, but you don't want to go too close because you obviously you need airflow and they need some space to grow. So it's kind of like a balance
Yeah.
with that. But I say it's
Absolutely.
definitely experiment.
I mean, I've been guilty in the past of trying to grow too many vegetables in one place, and it does create more issues. It's not just because they're all squashed in, but you need the airflow and everything. Otherwise, you get fungal diseases. It does have an increase in maybe slugs and snails, and
Yeah,
ants and things like that. So the airflow is really important on a number of levels. So it is good to have good spacing between the plants and knowing how they're going to grow and everything. So if you are new, you're a beginner gardener, and you're not really sure how something's going to grow, yeah, it's nice to like put them in a controlled environment, so to speak, to
yeah,
start with.
yeah. Just with, I guess
And,
with just with vegetables because they're a bit fussy, aren't they? Some
yeah,
vegetables, but I mean, I think it's good to try and chuck a few in. But yeah,
yeah,
just be
totally.
aware of that.
Yeah, I do
And the
love that.
same thing with the kind of I think that the word forest is a bit misleading, but
Mhm.
that's why I like the term foraged garden really. But a lot of people
Interesting.
know the term forest garden or food forest. There's a lot of different terms basically for this type of growing. And in the UK, because we have fairly low light levels compared to some places in the world, we need to have a fairly open canopy in our forest. So in order to grow like a sort of a varied amount of food on the lower levels, we need to like leave gaps between the canopies of the bigger trees, basically. So like some places, like people have been growing food in this way for like millennia, and some places around the world, like say like in India, there's still food forests and tribes that grow in this way, but because they have a lot more light there, they can grow quite close together, and some of the plants actually like it on the lower levels. But over here, we just need to let in a little bit more light. Totally.
Oh,
And there's so much that we can do as well, I think. I'm really also really interested in public edible space.
mhm.
And it's something that I have done for many years. I did a big garden at the university in Leeds, which was all edible public space. And I'm now doing a project in my local town, setting up all these uh, fruit and herbs and some vegetables in planters that people can just come and pick. So Incredible Edible, Tom and Dutton were like one of the first groups that like really pioneered this approach. And I think it's really, really powerful because we have all this landscaping around our towns and cities. A lot of people are living in towns and cities. And why not have some of it as edible?
Yeah,
So we can,
absolutely.
and especially high value things like fruit and soft fruit, especially, which grows so easily. I mean,
Yeah.
I've planted so many fruit trees all around Leeds and in public places, and it's really interesting because like all of the fruit gets picked.
So Caroline is currently setting up a new free workshop, 5 steps to an abundant edible garden. So if you want to talk to us a little bit about your new workshop, Caroline.
Yeah, so this is a workshop that is for if you are a complete beginner and you want to start growing a food garden, or maybe that you've tried growing food before and you've had really inconsistent results, and you'd like to grow more food with less work, basically. So I'm going to go through five like really simple steps that you can follow in order to create the foundations that is going to make your food growing a lot easier and a lot less work. So I found that there are these 5 foundations that people quite commonly get. If you don't do them, it can really slow you down. So um, it's on Thursday, the 10th of March at 8 p.m. and it's online. So if you come along live, you can ask me any questions about your food gardens that you have, and there will also be a replay.
So if you would like the link, I will be posting the link below this video, below this live. And yeah, and I will also post that in the group as well. And if you are watching on YouTube, it will be in the community as well. Thank you very much for joining me today, Caroline. If you just want to give us a brief rundown of where you are, and if you can let us know what your handles are, if you like, on social media, so people can find you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me. It's been loads of fun. And you can find me on Facebook. I've got a Facebook group, which is Abundant Edible Garden. And I've also got a Facebook page, also Abundant Edible Gardens. And on Instagram, I'm abundant_edible_gardens.
Fab. Okay, that's wonderful. As I say, any links will be linked in the description, so you can find her down there as well. Thank you for joining me, Caroline, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.